Hi, folks. Good to be with you again. Today, I thought I'd take a few moments. I probably won't bore you for 10, 12 minutes like I did the last time, but I want to take a few minutes and share with you how I got involved in this crazy business of writing. And so, let me just start off this way. Everybody thinks that maybe not everybody, but many people think that your life or your career would be worthy of a book, particularly if you've been places and done things. And so I thought the same thing. I've been all over the world, done lots of things, been in some difficult situations. So when I retired, that means I came home for good, not to work for anybody else, and just listen to Laura, mow grass and raise a garden. I decided to spend about 6 months writing down all of the things I could remember about my career. And as it turned out, the things grew. I did the accounts in short story format. And so, at about 90 stories over a 40-year career, I says, well, 90 doesn't sound good. So Laura and I were brainstorming over coffee one day. She says, why don't you do 101 stories? So I did. I did 101 stories of my life. Some of them funny, some of them very sad. Worst day of my career, that's in there. Challenging things when I wished I wasn't in that place at that time. But just stories like that. Wrote them all down, and Laura added to them. And so I'm all dressed up with nowhere to go. So the next game is, who in the world's going to publish something like that? Well, I found out that there's tons of people out there in the self-publishing industry who will take your $2, $3, $4, $5, $6,000, tell you how good it is, do a cursory edit, design a cover that they pull off a computer, take your picture, and publish your book. So you got a published book of your life that nobody knows about, and frankly, very few people care about. So I'm sitting there thinking about that after I'd written that book of 101 short stories. And I told Laura, you know what I think? I think I need some adult supervision. She said, well, you've always needed that. She says, but. She says, what are you talking about? I says, I think I need to talk to some folks more experienced in this writing game than I am. So that led us to looking at writers' conferences, and there are such things. So as a person of faith, Lorna says, well, if we're going to write, we want to write Bible lessons, but we also want to, faith is a part that is important to us. I said, so we selected Christian writers' conferences as where we would go, of people that write novels and adventure stories and all sorts of things. And so the one we locked in on, we decided to make a trip to Florida by passing through Spartanburg, South Carolina, where the Carolina Christian Writers Conference is held. So I went to the Carolina Christian Writers Conference on my way to Florida to see grandchildren and Mickey Mouse. And so we stopped there for 2 days, took my notebook of 101 short stories, and walked in the door trying to figure out the lay of the land. Well, writers' conferences have seminars of how to write, which not a bad thing, since I don't really know how to write. That'll sign up for 2 or 3 of those. And other things on how to publicize books, how to find literary agents. What's a literary agent? So I had to go to a class on that. Literary agent's a person that shops your book and finds out who will publish it. Of course, there's competition for literary agents. Not everybody is standing around waiting for you to walk in the door, even if you might have an interesting career to talk about. So I then discovered the genius of 15-minute interviews of people you might want to associate with. Not bad. So I signed up for a literary agent named Les Stobbe. Les Stobbe. I didn't know it at the time, and this was a God thing. Les Stobbe is renowned in the Christian book publishing industry. He's now 90 years old, still in pretty good health. And if I send him an email, he'll answer it. That's kind of neat to know a person like that. But it wasn't quite that easy to start with. So I walked in with my book of 101 short stories, and there was Les Stovey. He knew, looked at his watch, he gave me about 13 and a half minutes, and then he'd be clearing his throat. It's time to move on. So I showed him my book, gave him a synopsis of my spiel of my career, and he paid no attention to what I was saying. I was looking through the book, stopped and read a page here and a page there. And so when I was done with my 3-minute spiel, he closed the book, and he looked at me. Says, "Oh, this is not good." He said, "Well, Mr. Barnes, short stories like this are kind of flat. They may sell later, but they're not selling very well now." That's good advice. I just spent 6 months writing it, but at least it's good advice. That told me, don't give somebody $5,000 to publicize it, or to print it, publish it. So I said, okay. So I guess I'll have to go in another direction. And then he asked at that point, because during the conversation, I mentioned I was in the Army Corps of Engineers. And then he looked at me, and this was the God thing, and he said, "So you're a veteran?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am. Combat Engineer, 1328, or 1331. I don't remember my MOS, but it doesn't matter. It means Combat Engineer." And he says, "Well, I bet you either know, have experienced, or could find some people in near-death combat situations." I knew nobody. One or two, but I didn't know whether they'd talk. He says, didn't ask me at this point. It was like I was working for him. Les looked at me and he said, "Write me 3 stories of veterans in near-death survival." And so when I got back in the car, Laura and I were coming home. I says, "Well, I can write my own story. I volunteered to be on a helicopter. I volunteered to go with my colonel to Vietnam. And to make a long story short, and I'm not going to tell you the story, that didn't happen, but that helicopter crashed, and that colonel and 6 other people were killed. I would have been on that helicopter if I'd volunteered to go with him." And he just said yes. So he was divinely inspired to advise me, "Well, Jerry, just wait. If you get orders to Vietnam, you tell the transfer station, the Simon's desk, to name request me, and I'll name request you, and you can serve right beside me." So I saluted and walked out. 7 weeks later, he was dead. Huh. Tough. Saved my life. Saved my life. That's my story. So I had one story, that story. And so I called my buddy Rita. Rita's a agent at the VA, a lady that helps people with medical needs and so forth. So Rita says, "Well, I've got a nephew who's a former Green Beret, and he's always telling this story, and it'll just curl your toenails." She says, "His name's Ryan Braun. Let me call him, see if he'd give you his story." So she called Ryan and told him I was a friend of hers. Called me back and gave me his phone number. He said, "Yeah, I'll talk to him." Guess what, folks? Ryan Braun's story, The Ambush, got me a publishing contract. Now, it wasn't quite that easy, but I wrote that story and 2 others and took them to Les. And when he read Ryan Braun's story, he said, "Wow, that's quite a story, Jerry. I think we're onto something, brother." I've always had this notion in my mind, that combat stories written in a Reader's Digest format of 1,000 to 2,000 words, told through the mouths of the veterans themselves, will sell. He says there's lots of people in this country that want to hear those stories. He said, so he looked at me and he just said, "Keep writing, fella." And so I did. So, I went to one writers' conference. I went to a second writers' conference the very next year. I had finished about 10 stories. 12 stories. Hard to find. A lot of people turn me down. But over time, I gathered stories. The next year, I went to a different writers conference in down at Lifeway, the Billy Graham Center, and I signed up just like I did before. But this time, I signed up for literary agents and publishers. So, folks, I don't intimidate, if at all, or very easily at all. But I walked into this room, 300 people in that room, everybody trying to get the attention of literary agents and publishers. So I was just walking around. Now, how in the world do you know where the right person is? So I was just standing there, and a seat vacated, and a kind face with a wonderful lady, Deb Haggerty, sitting there. And she looked up at me, and she says, "Sit down. What can I do for you?" So I said, "Well, I'd like for you to read my story and tell me if it's worthy of you publishing it." She says, "Everybody wants me to publish their story, Jerry." I had my name tag on. She said, "But let me read the story anyway." So she read The Ambush. And she said at the end, "Wow, great story. You gonna write a book of these?" "Well, yes, ma'am, that's the idea." And she said, "Send me a proposal." I said, "I will do just that," and thanked her and walked out. I talked to 2 other literary agents. But here's the game, folks. The way the business works, you find a literary agent, and they take you to publishers and beg publishers to give you the time of day. In this case, I already had a publisher that was interested, no literary agent. So I talked to her about that, and she says, "Don't worry, now that you got a publishing contract, those guys are easy to find." So she answered my proposal and sent me a contract. So it was almost that easy, but it was a God thing. So the Lord just opened the door. There they are. And I had a publishing contract. And the next day, I went to another class where a guy named Steve Lobby was teaching a class of what literary agents do for people. So I sat in the class, gave him my card, and told him I was writing combat survivor stories, and I was a friend of Les Stobie. And so he gave me his card. He says, "Give me a call." So I called him and left a message. And I called Les and says, "I met a guy named Steve Lobby." He said, "Lobby?" He said, "He's got one of the largest Christian literary agencies in the country. Did he say to tell you to call him?" "Yes, sir." He said, "Jerry, if he calls you back, it'd be 30 days from now. He's so busy." Steve called me the next morning and said, "I've assigned a literary agent to you. They'll help you." So that's how I got started, folks. About 10% of it was effort, and about 91% of it, 89% of it, was the Lord lead me to the right people at the right time. And so that's how I got started. Deb published my first book in April of this year. She said the kindest thing to me that I told you on a previous blog. She said, "Jerry, I'll publish anything you write." And so now I'm blogging and I'm finding people that'll talk to me. Because once you got one book, other people will talk to you. And so I figured out that I'm going to be writing and talking, Lord willing, the rest of my life. And that's it for now, folks. We'll be at you next time talking about something else. By the way, before I sign off, I'd like to ask you, if you would, to share this with your friends list and ask you to sign up on my webpage or on the website for future blogs and to be a friend of the author. And we'll find some ways to incentivize you, tease you with stories that are in the second book. And I'm working on a third book. I've got about 40% of the third book recorded. It's about to be one B bomber. So that's it for now. We'll talk to you next time real soon. Thank you. So long.